Hi everyone, this is For the Love of Comics, and welcome to episode 9 of our shelf tours. That's because we've done 8 videos on 8 shelves so far in this viewer requested comprehensive collection tour of our bookshelves. You can find all 8 videos of the 8 shelves so far in this playlist linked above and in the description below. Some regular viewers may have thought we were done with our shelves, some would have known that we haven't because they haven't seen some of the comics that we've presented on this channel already, and eagle-eyed viewers may have even noted that one shelf that we haven't gotten to yet is this one right here, the one behind me in most of my recent videos. It's a bit of a chaotic shelf. It doesn't have much order. It's a catch-all sort of thing where a lot of books end up sometimes in transit to their final destination. And it's also a large shelf, not just because it has 2 sections, but because it's also quite deep. So certain shelves actually have 2 layers to them. That's why I've been a little intimidated to tackle this shelf. This is probably the second most difficult shelf to shoot from the logistics point of view. Still, a complete collection is what we promised a tour of, and a complete collection you shall have. So let me get out of your way, let's move in a little closer and take a look at shelf number 9. Right at the start is Gentleman Jim by Raymond Briggs. Raymond Briggs is perhaps most famous for his children's work like The Snowman, as well as The Wind Blows, which was for mature readers, but using the same style as his children's work does. Gentleman Jim is the same way. It isn't a children's story. It isn't as devastatingly sad as The Wind Blows. It is quite heartbreaking in many ways, but done in this simple style that really drives home the pathos. If you haven't read any Raymond Briggs, I'd strongly recommend looking into his work. Many would say he's the equal of Will Eisner as far as the father of the modern-day graphic novel format is concerned. This is Beasts, which is actually a collection of illustrations and write-ups by over 90 artists of varying beasts of mythology and literature. This is volume 2. I hope to get my hands on volume 1 one day. Brian Lee O'Malley's Seconds is his follow-up to Scott Pilgrim, but this isn't a comic series. This is one novel published in one volume, and was my first look at Brian Lee O'Malley in color. His art style really works with this color style, which I quite enjoyed. I like this story as well. It has fantasy elements to it, but it's not as effervescent fun as Scott Pilgrim is, although it is a more mature, more sophisticated work in many ways. Philosophy by Margaret de Heer was, I thought, a book like Philosophy for Dummies, but I was surprised at how well it was able to explain concepts and ideas as well as give us a taste of history and the development of philosophy. I have since then read more work by Margaret de Heer, both in book form as well as webcomics, and I think she has a real talent for this type of non-fiction comics. This is Crazy and Ignatz in Tiger Tea, the longest Crazy Cat story put into one volume over here by IDW. Fantagraphics does a great job reprinting all of Hedemann's Crazy Cat series, but this volume from IDW is my favorite single volume. It's a great hardcover with beautiful design and terrific homemade looking paper. Champs is the only Stephen Weisman comic I've ever read. It's sort of a postmodern dissection of the Little Rascals while being a very funny children's story as well. I think Yikes is the series in which these characters appear on a regular basis, but this is a completely standalone story that can be just enjoyed by itself. Far Arden by Kevin Cannon is a fantastic comic. This is very funny, very heartfelt, and packs a surprising emotional wall of right at the end. I can't think of many other books that are so funny until they're so heartbreaking the way that Far Arden is. Highly recommended. I've just started reading Matt Wagner's Grendel, and this is the Omnibus Volume 1, which I really enjoyed. The stories are very good, and the production is just terrific. Very good quality paper, high quality printing, and I'm looking forward to getting more of these Omnibus volumes. I know that Grendel has an extensive mythology. From what I've gleaned, there are various Grendels, and many creators have worked on this series, not just Matt Wagner, and there are tales of Grendel, etc., etc. But beyond that sketchy thing, I don't have much of an idea, so I'm really looking forward to seeing how this series develops over the subsequent omnibus volumes, which are out there. I just need to get them. From Pantheon Books, this is Shoplifter by Michael Cho, a very slim hardcover that I picked up on a whim and really enjoyed. It's a slice of life story about a woman who's slightly adrift, and it's very well told, both in the dialogue and the characterization, as well as the beautiful duotone art. Mercury by Hope Larson is the only Hope Larson I've ever read, but it's so good, I really should look up more works by her. Then we have three tiny little indies, The Bunfield by Amanda, I'm not sure how to pronounce that name, Joseph by Nicholas Robel, and Magic Boy and the Robot Elf by James Kochalka. Very unique storytelling styles across the three of them. These two from Drawn and Quarterly and this one from Top Shelf Production. Excellent indie comics publishers. Also from Drawn and Quarterly, Paul Goes Fishing by Michel Rabagliati. I'm a big fan of Michel Rabagliati's Paul's stories. This is one of several volumes from Drawn and Quarterly, as well as stuff that has appeared in anthologies. If you're not familiar with Rabagliati, I would highly recommend him. To me, this Canadian writer-artist feels like other Canadian writer-artists like Seth and Chester Brown and Guy Delisle, feels like a perfect combination of American comics and European styles. And the central semi-autobiographical character of Paul is a great guy to follow through the years. Moving Pictures is a comic by Kathryn and Stuart Immonen, the husband-wife team who are among my favorite comics creators. This was the first book of them working together that I read, this Casablanca-like story about World War II and the French resistance trying to keep precious works of art from Nazi hands, all done in the form of an interview interrogation between a soldier and an art director of a museum. Just a fantastic story with snappy banter and back and forth, excellent character work, just one of my favorite comics. Paris by Andy Watson and Simon Gain is also a great comic and one of those comics that I hear very little about. It's terrifically drawn. The art by Simon Gain reminds me of Indian artist Mario Miranda, but the story is just a wonderful love story between these two women in the 60s or 70s in Paris. A terrific love story, beautifully told. Then there are two books of Dungeon Quest by Joe Daly, published by Fantagraphics Books. This is sort of a spoof version of D&D RPG stories, done in a very odd and entertaining style. I've read book 1, but I haven't gotten book 2, so I've never been able to continue on to book 3. One day soon, I hope. And then book 1 and book 2 of Jar of Fools by Jason Lutesh. This was the first Jason Lutesh I ever read. It's not as searing and epic as Berlin, but it is a wonderful character study of two very interesting people. I love having these two slim book 1 and book 2 volumes, but this is also available in a 1-volume edition. Elmer by Gerry Alanguilan is one of the earliest grown-up comics I read when I was getting back into comics, and it just blew me away. It's about a world in which chickens become sentient sort of overnight all across the world and the way that changes society. It's quite hard-hitting from what seems like a kind of ludicrous premise, and I was surprised and impressed with the kind of impact that this comic about chickens talking and walking around had on me. I'm still not a vegetarian, but this is one of those books that could maybe convert some people. Then we have Nimona by Noelle Stevenson, a wonderful young adult's book, which I think can be read by anyone, telling the story of this girl who wants nothing more than to be the henchman to a villainous lord. It spoofs all the right things, it's got heart, it's got adventure, highly recommended. Mother Come Home is one of those books that started off slow and by the time it ended had a very deep and lasting impact on me. Paul Hornsheimer, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, does a great job of giving you a child's point of view slowly and easily in a way that's truly heartbreaking. I've briefly mentioned Epileptic in a couple of my videos. This is a searing autobiographical story of dealing with this illness that I think everyone should read, not just from the point of view of understanding more about people who deal with this, but also seeing how comics can be used to express some things that you really can't see being expressed in any other form. And the last book on the shelf is Kyle Baker's Nat Turner, about the slave rebellion led by the titular character. If you're not familiar with the works of Kyle Baker, or if you only know him from Plastic Man and other superhero comics, I think you owe it to yourself to take a look at this book. This is a terrific job of telling a very interesting story in an extremely unique way, and shows you artwork, layout, and composition in a practically wordless book in what I consider a remarkable achievement. Covering the next section is actually this copy of the annotated Sandman Volume 1. I've picked up Volume 1, 2, and 3 of these annotated editions recently, and I think I'll make a separate video on these volumes. First up over here, this is Outlaw Pete, based on a song by Bruce Springsteen by Frank Caruso. This is sort of an illustrated book set to the lyrics of Springsteen's song. I picked this up out of curiosity more than anything else. The Art of Charlie Chan Hok Chai by Sonny Liew is one of my favorite comics of recent years. Taking the form of a biography of an unknown Singaporean comics book artist and cartoonist, this book actually tells the story of Singapore and the evolution of its politics and its economics, as well as the repercussions on the population. It was, I think, controversial, or at least the government of Singapore wasn't fond of this, but I found this to be a terrific story and a wonderful experiment in showing false biography with real history. It's the kind of stuff that you see in Booker Prize winning novels, but done with such elegance and such verve that I highly recommend The Art of Charlie Chan Hok Choi as an example of terrific comics. Then we have the paperback edition of Gillian Tamaki's Boundless. This is a new edition. I think it had gone out of print because I wasn't able to get my hands on it for the longest time. I think this is a wonderful book. Whether or not you are familiar with other works of Gillian Tamaki, I think this is definitely worth reading. Then we have a number of volumes of Bad Machinery by John Allison. This is a UK set comic strip. These are the large landscape format print editions of John Allison's webcomic. This is before Giant Days, but after Scary Go Round, and contains a lot of intersecting worlds. These aren't in any order over here, but there's the case of The Simple Soul, the case of The Lonely One, the case of The Fire Inside, the case of The Good Boy, and the case of The Team Spirit, which I think is the first volume. Hilarious and heartfelt comics. My fandom of Rick Geary has led me to collect these 3 Mask volumes from Dark Horse. These are for children, but illustrated and written by Rick Geary, so I had to get them. I mean, it's fairly irresistible. These usually relate to Stanley Ipkiss's relatives or kids finding the mask somehow, Uncle Stanley, I think, for one of them, and are just delightfully illustrated, including the fantastic colors. So there's The Mask in School Spirits, The Mask Summer Vacation, and The Night Before Christmas, all by Rick Geary. Zot is a superhero series by Scott McCloud, the author of Understanding Comics, among other books, and I really, really love this series. This is the collected black and white series, so that means it's missing the first 10 issues which were originally published in color, but the series sort of rebooted or had a new start from issue 11 onwards, which switched to black and white, and all of those issues are collected in this book. Very highly recommended, a great series, showing you in practice a lot of what he explains in his more theoretical works. And then there are a whole bunch of books over here that I'm not going to pull out one by one, but do let me know if you'd like a closer look. Jenny Finn, Doom Messiah by Mignola, Craig Thompson's first book, I think, Goodbye Chunky Rice, which is a delightful read and has animal characters in it, but very different from Blankets, Habibi, the things that followed, although I haven't read any of his newer stuff, which is, I think, for children. Gabriel Bell's Everything is Flammable, Bridget Findackley and Louis Trondheim's Poppies of Iraq, a new Phantom story from Peter David called Danger in the Forbidden City from Hermes Press that I picked up just to see what latter-day Phantom looks like. I'm only familiar with the stuff from my childhood, which I think must have been from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. 5,000 kilometers per second from Fantagraphics book, an absolutely heartbreaking masterpiece of a comic. A random Rick Geary, Wonders and Oddities from Dark Horse Comics. The deluxe edition of The Private Eye from Brian K. Vaughan and Marcos Martin. I thought this was a great idea. The art is fantastic, but it isn't really at the same level as most Brian K. Vaughan, who I'm a big fan of, most Brian K. Vaughan writing. So I'm looking forward to their new book. Which I know it's been out for a while, by Vaughan and Martin, but I'm not 100% sold on it because, as beautiful as this book was, it didn't grip me the way I expected it to. And then Lucky in Love, book one, which was an interesting retro styled comic, which I never found a volume two for. And finally, 3 Seconds by Marc Antoine Mathieu, which I thought was a fantastic experiment in comic storytelling, which takes place all over the course of 3 seconds with just things zooming in and reflections, and it's like one continuous camera movement that just keeps going further and further into images by going into the reflections. There's actually also a mystery in it, that so if you read it through, you should be able to solve it, you should be able to figure out what's going on. Again, a very unique experiment, one that really succeeds. I wouldn't call it a great story, but I would definitely call it a great comic. The first section of the second shelf is one of those densely packed ones with 2 layers. Right at the beginning, we have here many volumes of the Dungeon series by Louis Trondheim, Johann Sfar, Christophe Blaine, and a number of other French creators. This is again a spoof on Dungeons and Dragons. It's a kind of genre that I enjoy, and I enjoy seeing spoofed, but it has a distinctly European flavor, very different from American takes on similar material. It's also spread across different series. The main series is Dungeon Zenith. Then there is the prequel series Dungeon Early Years, there is the sequel series Dungeon Twilight, and then there is a collection of short stories in Dungeon Parade and Dungeon Monsters. I haven't started on collecting the Dungeon Monsters yet. I've been working on the main series, the prequel series, and the sequel series so far. Also with Johann Sfar is Emmanuel Goubert's Sardine series. This is volume 6, so I've got volumes 1, that's Sardine in Outer Space, and then Sardine in Outer Space volume 2, 3, 5, and 6. I seem to be missing volume 4. This is a children's series that is quite good. It's a little odd. It's again very European, for lack of a better phrase, which means that the way they treat children's storytelling is quite different from American storytelling, which makes for a very interesting read. Alias the Cat by Kim Deitch, an experimental indie comic that I greatly enjoyed. Kari by Indian comics creator Amruta Patil, which I read many years ago and was very impressed by. And 2 volumes of Miss Don't Touch Me by Hubert and Karasoet. You've seen other Hubert and Karasoet works on that Eurocomics Shelf 7, but I believe Miss Don't Touch Me and Miss Don't Touch Me 2 were the books that got me introduced to those creators. Then 3 volumes of Castle Waiting. I, of course, have a Castle Waiting playlist on this channel, as well as a special video on these editions telling you which 2 to get and which one to avoid. And right at the end over here is the hardcover, dust-jacketed color edition of Razzle. Razzle is the black and white series that we saw the 4 oversized trade paperback volumes of on shelf 7, and I really like this recoloring. It's not as bold and bright as, say, the Scott Pilgrim recoloring is, but works really well for the material. Now for the stuff that's back there, which is made up mainly of 2 long series. One is Modesty Blaze. So the first 9 volumes of this stylish series brought out by Titan Books. These are the older editions. I believe there are newer ones out there with different covers. 1 volume of the collected Omaha that I picked up secondhand. And over here are the first 10 volumes, the original trade paperbacks of Love and Rockets. Love and Rockets has been collected over the years in a variety of different editions. These are by author, so the Bros Hernandez brought out issues of Love and Rockets which contain stories by both of them, and these collections put them not in chronological order of publication but by story arcs, which is pretty much the way all Love and Rockets collections have been done outside of the original magazine or comics publications. And back here is the Crystal Ballroom, which is not really a comic, but an illustrated book, coming of age, summer of 42 type of story. Then we come to the rightmost section of Shelf 2, which starts with this edition of The Collector by Sergio Toppi, published by Archaea Press. This is the only Toppi I own, although I've seen samples of other art and other books online, and I love it. This is spectacular artwork, and the story's pretty good too, although it's really the artwork that's the standout over here. I'd love to have Shiraz Day by Toppi, which seems to be his take on the 1001 or the Arabian Nights, but that seems to be extremely difficult to find. I'm happy to have gotten my hands on this, and I look forward to adding to my Toppi collection soon. Speaking of the 1001 Nights, the Encyclopedia of Early Earth, a graphic novel by Isabel Greenberg, is a marvelous story which deals with things like creation myths and origin stories, fables, and folklore, but all tied together where one story bleeds into another or is nested within another. It's really a story about stories and storytelling that spans geography and times in a way that I've very rarely seen. A marvelous book by Isabel Greenberg, highly recommended to anyone who likes books like Salman Rushdie's Harun and the Sea of Stories, books about storytelling and the role of stories in our lives. I'm looking forward to reading more by her. I've recently found there is a spiritual sequel to this book that she's done, and that's jumped to the top of my list. Then some more books by Rabagliati, including 2 more Paul books. Paul Moves Out and Paul Has a Summer Job. Paul Has a Summer Job is chronologically before Paul Moves Out, more of the wonderful Paul series in beautiful editions from Drawn and Quarterly. The Song of Roland is also a Paul story, although it focuses on the character Paul's father-in-law and his life. Equally wonderful. Then we have Sloth, a standalone graphic novel by Gilbert Hernandez, unrelated to his Palomar and Love and Rockets world. Then we have a number of Will Eisner's: Dropsy Avenue, A Life Force, The Building, A Family Matter, The Name of the Game, all from Norton Press, and all of which you can find in my video about how to get started reading the works of Will Eisner. I also have a 4-way edition comparison of A Contract with God, which features this, the centennial edition of A Contract with God. After the Will Eisners is Paco Roca's Wrinkles from Knockabout Press. This is the only book by Paco Roca that I've ever read, and it's a beautiful, sad, and funny book about a man with Alzheimer's who's admitted into a medical care facility and chooses not to accept his fate. Then we have a number of comics from Sonny Liew, which I chased down after I was blown away by the art of Charlie Chan Hock Chai. So we have Liquid City from Image Comics, which is an anthology edited by Sonny Liew, and he also contributes to it, collecting a number of works from Asian comics creators. This is a terrific anthology, not only because it introduces me to creators that I've never heard of, but also because it gives me a couple of pieces by people I've really enjoyed, like Gerry Alanguilan, whose Elmer we saw on a shelf earlier. There's also a volume of the Dr. Fate that Sonny Liew did with Paul Levitz, and The Shadow Hero, which is Sonny Liew's collaboration with Jean Luen Yang, reviving a long-forgotten Asian origin superhero. Then there's an extra copy of Modesty Blaze Volume 1, and then the 4 hardcover copies of Eric Shanau's The Age of Bronze series. This is Shanau's take on the Trojan War, using historical, literary, and other references to bring great historical accuracy and integrity to this very exciting story of multiple characters and families coming to clash in one of the great wars. This is a terrific job adapting it. It's one of my favorite comic series. Unfortunately, it seems to be on hiatus, so there are only these 4 volumes. Volume 1, 1,000 Ships, Volume 2, Sacrifice, Volume 3, Betrayal Part 1, and Volume 4, Betrayal Part 2. I've heard that this series is returning, and this time in color, and I can't wait to continue with it. And finally, a volume of Mad's Greatest Artists, the Sergio Aragones edition, collecting over 50 years of his finest work selected from Mad. I don't know if there's any such person who does not love Aragones and his art style, and this is a beautiful edition to have his greatest hits from Mad collected in one volume. Moving down to the third section, this is where the chaos really begins, with a double layer and some very random selections of books over here. First of all, Romeo and or Juliet by Ryan North is not a comic book. This is a choose your own adventure type of story, but I had it with me when I got the Squirrel Girl comic signed by Ryan North at Delhi Comic Con, and it's been on the shelf since. I need to put it away. I've talked a little bit about Shiga's Demon Volume 1 in my comics that I really enjoyed in 2018 video. And these are some of the Indian indie comics and things I picked up from Comic-Con. You can check some of these books out in my Indie Comics Haul video. As for the rest, I'll have to figure out a better way to showcase them. Then we're left with 3 volumes of Electric Girl by Michael Brennan. This is a comic series that I knew very little about before I picked these 3 volumes up very cheap on eBay. It had a cute and jokey approach that I really liked. I don't think I've seen any other comics by this publisher. Then in the second layer back here, I've got 3 deluxe editions of some Valiant series, Harbinger, Archer and Armstrong, and Exo Man of War. I actually bought these 3 books for a friend of mine who was supposed to collect them from me, but he never did, so here they are. And over here is a collection of Lucky Lukes. Lucky Luke comics are these European Western comics that are maybe a little dated but are still quite charming. I read this much later in life than Asterix and Obelix, which I practically grew up with, and while I don't hold it in the same regard, they're quite entertaining. Over the years, I've managed to pick up a number of these albums that seem to be quite common in India. In the middle of these albums is actually a childhood copy of Smurfs album by Peo. This is the first encounter I ever had with the Smurfs. I think I was 8 or 9 years old. And its personal childhood antiquity, I think, is fairly evident. And then this is the 3-volume hardcover box set of Ghost in the Shell, a series that I really enjoyed and was formative. This is one of the earliest manga that I'd read after Lone Wolf and Cub and Akira. It was Ghost in the Shell because of the anime. I borrowed it from a friend and read it, so I was glad to pick up this hardcover box set edition a couple of years ago. And then finally over here is The Silver Darlings by Will Morris, something I picked up at a used bookstore and quite enjoyed. It's nothing I've ever heard anyone ever talk about. And this is a book of 16 biographies of comics luminaries that was given to me as a present. And the next section continues the chaos. This is a large black and white edition of the first volume of Mouse Guard. I think I'll properly show it off in a later episode when I eventually get around to Mouse Guard, which I definitely will. This is the first edition of A Contract with God, which is featured in its own video when I covered Will Eisner and A Contract with God. Bob Newgarden's We All Die Alone of this lovely velvet cover that is unfortunately a dust magnet. I'd never read any Newgarden before this. He's very interesting, very creative cartoonist, taking things that we already know and expect a certain way and then subverting them to some completely different effects. Then Seeds by Ross McIntosh, which I really liked as a father and son story. The anthology Once Upon a Time Machine, brought out by Dark Horse Comics. A random trade paperback of Rex Mondi. Guy Delisle's Shenzhen first edition hardcover. This is without a dust jacket, so it's an extra copy. I have the dust jacketed one on shelf 3 with my other Guy Delisle. A paperback copy of The Barefoot Serpent by Scott Morse, a book that I really enjoyed. It's a very slim tale of a little girl on a beach and a biography of Akira Kurosawa at the same time. As ridiculous as that sounds, this works superbly. Bourbon Island 1730, another second copy. I've got a couple of doubles over here, so I think this doubles up as my for sale shelf, this one and the one directly below it. Cosplayers by Dash Shaw, which I showed in one of my new acquisitions videos. The Wrenchies by Farrell Dalrymple, which I bought recently but haven't got around to reading just yet. Paul Auster's City of Glass, adapted by David Mazzucchelli and Paul Karasik, which I mentioned in another one of my videos. This edition of Cannon by Wallace Wood, which I can't open because of its X-rated content. The interesting thing about Cannon is because it was made for the US Armed Forces, it was exempt from the censorship laws that otherwise ruled over comics at that time. Wallace Wood is one of my favorite artists, and I'm glad to have this edition of this historical curiosity. And a couple of other random comics, including the Shaolin Cowboy magazine, which I had never heard of, found on Amazon used and picked up. The Blade Runner over here is not a comic, that's a DVD box set. And right at the bottom here, unfortunately, I'll have to take you handheld for this last, final, and very quick look. I have over here the Akira 35th anniversary box set, which is the subject of one of my earliest videos. On the sides, I have some Marvel trade paperbacks, including these tiny digest-sized ones. And over here, I have some of my old Vertigo trade paperbacks, the complete 100 Bullets, the complete Preacher, and extra copies of Fables. So that wasn't too bad. If you've stuck around so far, I hope that means that you enjoyed this video. Let me know, as always, if you'd like a closer look or if you have any questions in the comments below. This has been For the Love of Comics. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.